caste-based reservation system and the arguments related to it have been the subject of national debates, electoral promises, books, forum discussions, and even petty fights. Reservations is a topic that is passionately talked about here in the general community, as a lot of us are affected by it, pronounced by the fact that Jeetam Global University also happens to be located in a predominantly Punjab region. To speak on how backward the backward classes are, with reference to the Jat, Maratha, and Patel reservations, we have here with us today Professor Ashwini Deshpande from the Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University. Professor Deshpande's work is extensive on the economics of discrimination and affirmative action issues, with a focus on caste and gender in India. She has authored many books, including Grammar of Caste, Economic Discrimination in Contemporary India and Affirmative Action in India. She has received the Excellent Rank Award for the Outstanding Dissertation in 1994 and the 2007 B.K.R.B. Rao Award for Indian Economists Under 45. Please join me in welcoming Professor Deshpande and Madam Victoria.
Thank you very much. I will actually, that title earlier is actually two papers in one, and I thought today that it would be better for me to focus on the question of the demands for inclusion into the backward classes category by the three groups on which I've done some recent empirical work. So I'll focus on that. On the question of how backward are the OBCs, I'm happy to talk about it in the questions and answers. But today, talk will be more focused on the specific issue of reservation demands for reservation by these three communities. So this is joint work that I'm doing with Rajesh Ramachandran, who's at Goethe University in Germany. So basically, the whole issue, is about dominant groups, of which these three jatis are examples, demanding to be classified in the OBC category. And as we know, it's other backward classes. So they are demanding OBC status, which would entitle them with reservations in jobs and education. And so the real question that we were trying to investigate in this paper, which is forthcoming in Economic and Political Weekly very soon, is, are these groups forward within quotes and backward within quotes? And I'm using the words forward and backward in the way these terms are used in the standard discourse in India. Right? So we could argue about if these are the right terms or not, but perhaps not today. Let's accept the way in which these terms are used, and I'm going to be using them in the same sense. So, for example, Marathas, the state from where I come from, Maharashtra. Marathas, which is a kind of a middle caste in Maharashtra, has been on the streets demanding OBC status. You know that in Gujarat, Patels or Patidars have been engaged in a massive protest, which is ongoing in the sense that it's not that they're blocking roads today, but the demand is very much on the cards. And Hardik Patel, their leader, who was jailed for sedition, is now out. And he campaigned for the Shiv Sena in the recently concluded municipal elections in Bombay. There's a rumor that the Shiv Sena might put him up as a chief ministerial candidate in Gujarat election. So, he has a political future ahead of him. He's a very political figure, and naturally this demand is going to be very much on the agenda for a while to come. And Jats in Haryana, I need not tell you more about that. You already know you faced the brunt of the agitation last year. The point about, and then there are Kapus in Andhra Pradesh, there are other groups that have been demanding similar status, similar classification. The point about these groups is that these are politically powerful and also economically dominant. And this is an assertion I'm making right now, and I'm going to show that in the subsequent slides. And it's interesting that they are demanding a remedial measure, which is usually reserved for groups that have historically suffered disadvantage or discrimination or stigma or extreme backwardness of some kind. So reservations or affirmative action is all over the world is seen as a remedial measure. So to remedy what? To remedy some underlying problem such as the ones I've described. And it's interesting that groups that we don't typically view as worthy of remedial measures are now in fact demanding a remedial measure. It's as if they were languishing because of a combination of these characteristics, and therefore they feel that they deserve, those disparities deserve to be addressed. Now, on affirmative action, there's a ton of research. I myself have done research. I have a book, as she mentioned. So today's, again, I can't go into all of that, but I'm happy to take questions with the question and answers. And no matter what the context, no matter which groups are seen to be eligible, the minute there's affirmative action on the table, it is controversial. So you should not think that today the demands by Jats or Marathas or Patels are controversial because people feel that they are not worthy of reservations. You can take any group, we can all agree on a particular group which we feel is worthy, and the minute you say affirmative action for that group, whichever group that we all agree might be worthy of affirmative action, there will be controversy. So the point is that the instrument of affirmative action is controversial no matter what the context, and no matter in what form it's delivered. And this is true all over the world. So whether people make a distinction between quotas and preferences, they'll say, oh, so-and-so is deserving, so-and-so is not deserving, etc. But that's actually not true. Those who are opposed to affirmative action are opposed to it, period, regardless of the context. That's something to keep in mind, particularly as we get further ahead in this paper. In the case of these three groups that we've analyzed in this paper, the interesting twist to the story is, on the one hand, there is widespread opposition to reservation or affirmative action on the ground. Most people are opposed to it. So you look at editorials in newspapers, you look at academic writings, you look at people's perceptions. Everybody believes it's unfair, it's anti-merit, it's a wrong policy to have. So on the one hand, there's this very widespread opposition to the policy. But at the same time, these three groups are today on the streets demanding the very instrument that people particularly are opposed to. And they themselves don't fit the normal definitions of marginalization. Right? So they don't seem, or prima facie, it doesn't appear like they are worthy for remedial measures. So that is a little twist to the story in this particular case. And particularly when you look at the groups like Patels, in the mid-1980s, in 1985 in particular, Gujarat was on the boil in a very similar way that it was on the boil in 2015. Okay? But at that time, in 1985-1986, the reasons that Gujarat was on the boil was because there was widespread agitations against reservations. That people felt that reservations towards SCs and STs, Dalits and Adivasis, were unjustified, were anti-merit. They were denying people legitimate recipients of positions. They were denying them positions. Okay? And who was on the forefront of these agitations? The Patels. Right? So 30 years ago, they were on the streets opposing reservations, and they were not only opposing, they were not saying that these groups should not be targets of reservations. That, of course, they were saying. But additionally, they were making a larger point saying reservations are bad. They are anti-merit, they are unfair, and the usual criticisms of reservations. So it's interesting, this kind of about turn by a community that itself was in the forefront of anti-reservation agitations today, demanding reservations for themselves. Quota debates, one can go on, for talking for days on end, and you'll never come to a conclusion on this. So first of all, the existing quotas, which is for SCs and STs, are controversial. When they were extended to OBCs for jobs in 1991 and for education in 2006, those became controversial, right? So all the existing quotas today, or at least most of the existing quotas today, are controversial. Okay, and those who so forget about the demands by these communities. I'm talking about groups that have already been designated as beneficiaries. Those quotas, those are controversial. There is a lot of literature, including academic literature, which believes that the quotas, that these groups are not worthy of quotas because the nature of caste disparities has changed. Alright? So if you look at the nature of caste disparities, they have changed in a way that there's convergence between caste groups. And because there's convergence between caste groups, you can't really now sustain the demand for caste-based quotas. Okay, again, those who are interested in the literature, I can point you towards that. But take it from me that there is a lot of literature that shows the changes, the evolution in caste disparities for making the case that caste-based reservation are no longer can no longer be justified. Okay, now enter the dominant communities. This debate, which is already pretty nasty, becomes even murkier, because now you have the entry of groups that are not legitimately seen as deserving of remedial measures. Now, if groups that are at the bottom of certainly the economic hierarchy, and they also bear the stigma of untouchability like the Dalits, if those groups are not deserving of quotas, surely the groups that are economically much better off and are not stigmatized, would they be deserving of quotas? You know, so there's that question. So now the debate has become even murkier, which is an already existing opposition to quotas now becomes more complicated when groups that are not legitimately seen as deserving of remedial measures now enter the fray and start asking for those measures for themselves. And this presents huge challenges for public policy formulation. Right? So, for example, when Jats blockade Delhi, which is the capital city of India, everybody has to sit up and take notice. You can't say, well, you know, you can go on agitating, we don't particularly care about your demand, it's your right to agitate, but we will not pay attention. You know, in India there's a dime a dozen, every day there's an agitation about something or the other. Not every agitation gets seriously considered, but these agitations cannot be ignored at all, because these agitations, just like these groups are powerful, their agitations are also equally powerful. So they cannot at all be ignored. And therefore there's a challenge when already there's opposition to the existing quotas superimposed on these new demands. So what can governments do? So that's the issue. You know, there's other paper where I've looked at disadvantage, where we've looked at the first question, which is, have caste-based disparities changed in a way that so caste-based quotas are no longer valid? That's another paper, but I'm just going to quickly take you through what we've found in that paper, which is what we've done is, you know, ideally, in order to look at this question, you should have longitudinal data. What does that mean? It means a same set of households that are tracked over a period of time. So you have repeated interviews, repeated surveys every year or every 2 years, every 3 years even, and then you see how households or individuals have changed their position, and then you can track different trajectories to see whether individuals from different groups are coming closer or are moving apart. Now in India, we have the first possible longitudinal data set, which is the India Human Development Survey, for which we have 2 rounds of longitudinal data. So that's good, and we are also working on that, and that's in fact what I'm going to be presenting when I focus on the 3 jatis. But if you wanted to do a longer term analysis of how caste disparities have moved, the 2 panels are not good enough, you need more. So what we did is we took NSS, which is National Sample Survey data, and we sliced them by age cohort. Right? So these national sample surveys data are big. So you have 1,20,000 households, etc. So it's huge. So you can, even when you slice them by age cohort, you still get a large enough number that you can say something about them. Right? And we did what those who've done econometrics will know, what is called difference in differences. So the simple idea is the following. Take the oldest cohort, the oldest people. So take the oldest upper castes and take the corresponding Dalits. Take, let's say, years of education, let's take one indicator. So you take the gap in the years of education between the oldest upper caste cohort and the corresponding oldest Dalit cohort. Let's say the gap in the years of education is 5 years. So oldest upper caste cohort had 5 years more of education than oldest Dalits. Now take the youngest, or take any in between, but I'm just giving you the oldest and the youngest. Now take the youngest. Take the youngest upper caste cohort and take the oldest upper caste cohort. The youngest upper caste cohort also has more years of education than the youngest Dalit cohort, except that they only have 3 years of education more than the youngest Dalit cohort. So what will you, if you compare the 2, the gaps in the 2, what would you say? Are the groups coming closer or are they moving further apart? Further apart? First the gap was 5 years and now the gap is 3 years closer. So the younger, if you look at younger generations of Dalits and upper caste, the gap in the years of education between them is less than the gap. So, supposing the older people, the upper caste had, let's say, 8 years of education, and the Dalits had 3 years of education on average. So the gap was 5. I'm making these numbers up. These are not the real numbers. This is just to explain the point. And then you look at the youngest one. So let's say the oldest upper caste has 11, let's say, and the youngest Dalit has 11 minus 8. So both have increased. Upper caste went up from 8 years to 11 years. Dalits went up from 3 years to 8 years. But what happened to the gap between them? It's lower, right? So you would say that they are becoming like each other in terms of years of education. There's convergence. But what if the gap had increased? Supposing it had 11 and say 6, right? Then it would be, or 11 and 7, that 11 and 6 would make it the same, but 11 and 7, that would make it, 11 and 5, that would make it larger, that would be 7 years as opposed to 5 years there, and that would be, that would show that the groups have diverged. So that's basically the methodology, but all of this is more done in a more fancier way with regressions, etc., etc. So basically you find that if you look at household level indicators, which is monthly per capita expenditure, land ownership, and urbanization. And so we do these differences between OBCs and upper castes as one group, and SC, STs and upper castes as the other. Right? So there are two different. So we find that in household level indicators, there is actually divergence in monthly per capita expenditure, both between OBCs and upper castes and between SC, STs and upper castes. Right? So these are existing OBCs. We are not at the Jat Patel Maratha story yet. So these are groups that are already classified as OBCs. So on MBC there's divergence. In land ownership there's neither convergence nor divergence. And in urbanization there's convergence. So more groups are becoming more urban. All groups are becoming more urban. Okay, individual level indicators, these are household level indicators. What about individual level indicators? Now literacy rates, there's convergence. So proportions of these groups that are literate, which means that they can just read and write their name, that's the definition of literacy. On that there is, and primary school education, there's convergence. So the gaps are narrowing. But all levels of education after middle school, so all categories of education that are required for individuals to get any decent source of livelihood, on all of those, and we've done it separately for each category, there is divergence, both between OBCs and upper castes and between SC, STs and upper castes. Okay? We've looked at occupation, we've looked at agricultural occupations, blue collar occupations, white collar occupations. I'm just focusing on white collar because, again, you think of professional occupations, these are white collar occupations, and you find divergence. Okay. We actually, again, I'm not going into that now, but we looked at extension of quotas to OBCs in 1991, and through some econometrics, we tried to find whether it actually made a difference. You know, people say quotas are useless because they don't actually make a difference. Nothing changes because of quotas. People just feel happy, that's it. Actually, it turns out that extension of job quotas to OBCs did increase their access to government jobs by 4 percentage points relative to other class groups. So yes, it made a difference. And we also find actually that using the same strategy, we find that increase in secondary school attainment by the youngest cohort of OBCs, and we analyze that interpret that as an incentive effect. So because younger school-going OBC kids now know that there are reservations later on, that they have possibility of access to reservations, their secondary school attainment goes up, because you need minimum secondary schooling to access any government job. So we find positive effects of quotas on OBCs. Okay. So this is just a very quick snapshot, and there are many, many other results in that paper, but this was just a very quick snapshot of what is happening to disparities on the ground. And these are existing SC, STs and OBCs. So communities that have already been classified as beneficiaries of reservations. So first, to repeat, caste disparities on most indicators, no sign of convergence. Secondly, in terms of benefits of reservation, yes, it works. That there are benefits. So these are the two things you need to keep in mind when we now come to the Jats, Patels and Marathas. Now NSS data or the census data or NFHS and other data sets don't allow identification by Jati. IHDS in the second round, the 2011-12 round, the second panel of IHDS actually allowed us to identify these three groups by their Jati names. Kapus we could not because these are written in terms of surnames, so we couldn't identify correctly. But these three we were able to identify. And so what we do using the IHDS data is basically so this slide actually sums up the entire rest of the paper, but I'm just going to summarize first and then go into the details. So what we do is for a large number of indicators like educational indicators, occupational indicators, land ownership, fluency in English, access to toilets, all of these things, we compare these three Jatis in their respective states. So Jats in Haryana, Patels in Gujarat and Marathas in Maharashtra to other Jatis in the same state. And then we see where do these groups stand in relation to the other Jatis. Now, what are the other Jatis? Brahmins, other forward castes, existing OBCs and SC/STs. So Jats in Haryana will be compared to Brahmins in Haryana, other forward castes in Haryana, existing OBCs in Haryana and SC/STs in Haryana. Similarly Patels and similarly Marathas. And we try to see for each of these indicators where are these Jatis placed. And because it's an empirical exercise, it's not a question of what we feel, it's a question of what the data are showing us. So, in a nutshell, using the standard definitions of backwardness that the Indian state has employed, these three communities are not backward. Using a whole range of indicators, and I'm just going to show you many graphs now showing this thing, but this is a summary of what's coming. Then, if that is the case, then why is it that these groups are on the street demanding reservation? So there we advance what we are calling the structural change hypothesis, many elements of which have been in the public domain. You've read many articles in magazines and newspapers that have picked up on one or two elements of this hypothesis, and we test for each of those elements. So again, through data, we do show that they feel disempowered because of the large-scale economic changes that are going on in the agrarian sector. They feel that they are unable to take advantage of the emerging opportunities in the non-agrarian sector because of historical reasons. And they are feeling that the ground is literally shaking beneath their feet and they can't make sense of it, and they feel reservations are a way of at least catching on to some benefits in the face of these widespread benefits. So the feeling of marginalization and the perception that we are losing out is very real. And indeed there are some indicators on which they have reasons to be concerned about. But in a land such as India, where there are agitations a dime a dozen literally every day, how is it that these three groups are so successful in articulating their demands and being mobilizing public support for their demand, including the support of respective state governments? So not Gujarat, but both in Haryana as well as in Maharashtra, the state governments actually conferred the backward classes status on these two groups, which was later struck down by the Supreme Court. So they were...
It was actually the union government.
The union government, because of the...
Talking about Ram Singh's case, Ram Singh versus the Union of India is the case where Manmohan Singh's government had given reservation to Jats.
Yes, UPA government had accepted.
That is not the state government.
But in Maharashtra, the state government has given reservation twice to Marathas. Both times it's been struck
But what was
down.
declared invalid was the union government's notification.
But even Maratha has been struck down.
Like that case, I don't know.
Yeah, Maratha has also been struck down. And it doesn't matter. The point is that the point that I'm simply making here is that they are politically connected in a way that whether it's a central government or whether it's a state government, they've got heavyweight politicians behind them supporting their demand. That's the point, really. And this you don't see this kind of support for many other agitations, which you or I might think are extremely legitimate agitations, but you don't see the force of political power behind each agitation that goes on, right? And so our third part of our paper actually looks at the reasons behind their mobilization success. Why is it that they've been able to mobilize such large numbers that not only are members of the community but also politicians? So this is what the paper is, and this one slide actually summarizes the entire paper. Now let's go into the detail. Okay. So the history of these three demands is a checkered history. There's a lot of literature on the history of these demands. We discussed that in the paper. I'm not going into that right now. You know more than me that the agitations have been extremely violent. Quotas have been granted by state/central. Let's amend that right away to Jats and Marathas, and they've been struck down by the Supreme Court. And this is, for the Jats, it's true even when the commission that the National Commission on Backward Classes had established to examine the state of backwardness of the Jats in 7 states. They had produced a document which said the Jats as a group cannot be considered backward, but overruling that recommendation, reservation was conferred. I mean, not reservation. The backward classes status was confirmed, but it didn't go very much further. So that's really the point that we are trying to make. And so we start by looking at the India Human Development to a survey 2012 data, and our sample is 9,658 individuals for Haryana, about 16,000 for Maharashtra, and about 9,500 for Gujarat, respectively, of which about 13, 26 and 5% are Jats, Marathas and Patels respectively. Okay, so this we are looking at that sample for the whole state, and within that you have these 3 Jatis separately. So this is the sample that we are working with. Okay. Now what are the household level indicators? So what does that mean, household level indicators? It means that indicators that for which information is collected for the entire household, not for individuals. Right? So we look at whether the household is classified as below poverty line or not. What is the per capita consumption expenditure? Now again, those of you who use data sets know that when these surveys look at consumption expenditure, what they do is they ask the household head for how much did you spend on clothing, how much did you spend on food, etc., and then they divide that by the number of people living in the household on an ordinary basis, and that's how the per capita consumption expenditure is obtained. So they don't go from individual to individual asking how much did you spend. So this is also considered a household level indicator, even though it's a per capita consumption expenditure. Access to electricity, access to a flush toilet, land ownership. And actually in 2012 IHDS, they asked a question about, does your household practice untouchability? There are 2 questions. Now, ideally the answer to this should be no. Why? Because untouchability is illegal. So it's like saying, are you a smuggler? Right? Even if you were, you would say, no, I'm not, because you know that smuggling is illegal. So if people know that untouchability is illegal, they would not report that. And so whatever answers you get to this question, you have to remember would be probably underestimates, because some people at least are aware that there is untouchability. And so those who say, so people either say yes or no to this question, and those who say no, then there's one more question asked, that is it okay then for any member of any caste to enter the kitchen in your household? And then they say yes or no there, right? Anyway, so these are the 2 questions. So it's a very rough measure of untouchability, anyway, there it is. And the reason we consider this is because the practice of untouchability is higher the higher up you are in the caste status, the more careful households are about keeping the purity of their caste status alive. And so we wanted to see, in terms of the self-reported answers, where do these castes see themselves in the social scale? Are they more like Dalits, saying no, we don't really, or are they more like Brahmins, who are a greater number of responses to saying yes, we practice untouchability, remembering that this is an illegal practice. Now again, those of you who like regression equations, that's what our regression equation looks like. And so you have Brahmins, forward caste, OBCs and SC/STs, and the omitted category is the Jati in that particular state. Okay, and then we control for whether they are urban, which district they are from, what is the age of the household head, and what is the household size. So what we are going to be showing you now is these 4 groups, that is the Brahmins, the forward caste, the OBCs and SC/STs, relative to the Jats in Haryana, the Patels in Gujarat, and the Marathas in Maharashtra, relative to these, for each of these variables. Now look at per capita consumption expenditure. Okay, again, the way to interpret these graphs is if those lines that cross those dots, if they, so you see a line around 0, the red line. So if it crosses the red line, it means it's not significantly different. And groups that are below the red line means that they are worse off. Groups that are above the red line means that they are better off. That's the way to read the graph. So let me take you through one graph and then we should be able to figure out the others. Take the top left graph, which is for Jats, right? So for the first notch is for Brahmins in Haryana, not Jats. And what do you see there?
It's about the.
No, but does it touch the 0 line or not?
No, yes.
Yes, it does.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so that vertical thing, that's called the confidence interval. It touches the 0, which means that Jats in Haryana, the per capita consumption expenditure of Brahmins in Haryana is not significantly different from Jats. That's the way to understand that. So for Brahmins, it's 4023, and it's not significantly different from Jats. Take the next one, forward casts.
It's less than.
It's less, but it's still touching 0, right? Which means that the forward casts consumption expenditure is not significantly different from the Jats. Come to the OBCs.
So just a question, but does that mean that for the forward casts is actually less than the
Yeah, but the confidence interval is touching the 0 line. So confidence, we'll talk about confidence intervals later, but just take it from me right now that it's not significantly different.
okay.
So there's a concept in statistics that called statistical significance. So two numbers can look very different, but if they are not statistically different, you regard them as not different. So that's what it is really. So take it from me right for now. Okay. So basically now for Jats we see that the line for Brahmins and for forward caste is touching the 0 line, which means that it's not statistically different from Jats compared to Jats. Come to the next one, which is the current Haryana OBCs. It is less than 0 and it is not touching the 0 line, which means that current OBCs in Haryana have a significantly lower per capita consumption expenditure than the Jats. And the SC/STs are even lower and also significant. So in terms of per capita consumption expenditure, where do the Jats lie? They are similar to the Brahmins and to the forward castes. Now I'm not going to go through every line like this. Now you've understood how to read the graph. So let's move to the next one. In Marathas, they are worse off than the Brahmins. They are the same as the current OBCs and forward castes in terms of per capita consumption expenditure, but better off than the SC/ST. Marathas in Maharashtra. Second graph to the right. Come to the Patels. They are the same as the Brahmins and the forward castes in terms of per capita consumption expenditure, and better off than current OBCs and SC/STs in Gujarat. Yes.
The graph for the Marathas, it shows that OBCs are almost the same as the forward caste. Like instead of only comparing Marathas and OBCs and forward caste, we can also see that the forward caste and OBCs and
Are very
Maharashtra
similar.
supports.
Very similar.
So which also means that OBCs over there in
Maharashtra are not that badly off, yeah, absolutely. But that's another story. Right now we are just focusing on these. Yeah, you're right. That's absolutely correct. So this is the story on the per capita consumption expenditure. Let's move to the probability of being classified as poor. Okay. Now again, before you tell me, I already know that the BPL classification is fraught with all kinds of errors, etc., etc. But we assume the errors are applicable to all categories. So it's not for us right now to talk about the errors in BPL classification. So let's just take the classification as it happens with errors and all, right? So now let's look at the top one again, which is again the Haryana one. So you find that for Brahmins and Jats, the probability of BP being classified as poor is the same. Okay. Forward caste are more likely to be classified as poor than Jats. OBCs are even more likely to be classified as poor than Jats. SCs are even more likely to be classified as poor than Jats, and STs anyway in Haryana is not a very large community, but they are similar. But STs, you know that for the time being, because the ST community in Haryana is not, but it's the same as Jats. Okay. Marathas, Brahmins, forward caste, OBCs are the same, have the same probability of being classified as poor as the Marathas. Only SCs and STs have a higher probability of being classified as poor compared to the Marathas in Maharashtra. Patels, again, only SCs and STs in Gujarat have a higher probability of being classified as poor in Gujarat compared to all the other groups. So this is BPL classification. Probability of owning or cultivating land, very similar story, speaks for itself. Okay. So in what happened to the zero line? Okay, sorry, it's my fault. The cutting is there, but it's in the cutting and pasting. It's from the paper. I made a mistake. So anyway, the point is that actually everybody is below the zero line, and nothing in Haryana, nothing is touching the zero line. So all other groups have a lower probability of owning and cultivating land in Haryana than the Jats, because all the groups are below the zero line. Can you see that? Even though I didn't do a good job at copy pasting, but you can see you can read off the left, the y-axis. It's minus 0.2, so it's a minus. It's less, right? So all groups have a lower probability than Jats of owning and cultivating land. In Maharashtra, only the Brahmins and Marathas have the similar probability. All other groups have a lower probability of owning and cultivating land. And in Gujarat, everyone has again like Haryana, everyone has a lower probability of owning. So even the forward caste line doesn't actually touch zero. So everybody has a lower probability of owning and cultivating land compared to the Patels in Gujarat. So Patels in Gujarat and Jats in Haryana are truly the dominant caste in terms of land ownership. Of course, these are averages. So before you tell me, oh, but within Jats and within, of course I know that. Right? So these are average probabilities. So within Jats, of course, there are many poor Jats, there are many poor Patels, but these are averages. So we are right now looking at the average status of the community. Now the interesting part. Again, I messed up and I didn't do a good job at the copy paste, but never mind, there's enough there. Practicing untouchability, see what you see here now. So Brahmins and forward castes in Haryana are more likely to practice untouchability than the Jats. Okay? OBCs and Jats are similar in terms of their self-reported practice of untouchability, and of course SC/STs are much lower than in terms of their self-reported practice of untouchability. In terms of Gujarat, it's the same story again, which is that Patel's self-reported practice of untouchability is like the OBCs, the same result as Haryana. And interestingly, in Maharashtra, Marathas' self-reported practice of untouchability is the same as Brahmins, forward caste, and OBCs. So something that she already noted, which is that OBCs in Maharashtra are actually pretty much well off in the sense that they are much better off than the gap between Dalits and OBCs is much higher in Maharashtra than compared to the other states. And so you find actually that existing OBCs, Marathas, Brahmins, and other forward castes have a similar self-reported practice of untouchability. So that's where this is their self-perception of how they see themselves in social hierarchy, subject to the caveat that these are all underreported instances of practice of untouchability. Okay, so these were all at the household level. Now let's move to individual level outcomes. So these data sets also canvas information from every individual in the household. Let's look at that. So years of education, obviously there's nothing called household years of education. So you look at every individual member's years of education. So you just now look at all Brahmins, every individual basically. So now we are moved to the individual level arena. In terms of years of education, in Haryana, Brahmins and forward castes have higher years of education than Jats, and OBCs and SC/STs have lower years of education than the Jats. So Jats are kind of in between, but higher than OBCs. In terms of Maharashtra, Brahmins have way higher levels of education in Maharashtra. Forward caste, OBCs and Jats have similar. SC/STs have significantly lower. Gujarat, Brahmins higher than Patels. Forward caste and Patels similar. OBCs and SC/STs lower. That's the years of education story. Okay, if you look at those who have 12 years of schooling or more, because we know that because of poverty and everything, a lot of children drop out in the transition from primary to middle, from middle to secondary school. So really 12 years of education is a substantive amount of education that's going to give you access to opportunities, better livelihood opportunities later on, whether it is in terms of employment, even in terms of starting your business, you're likely to be more successful if you have 12 years of schooling or more. So if you just concentrate on individuals who have 12 years or more, then again it's a very similar picture to years of schooling, years of education, so that you see Brahmins and forward castes are more likely to have 12 years of schooling than Jats, but OBCs are less likely. The current OBCs in Haryana are less likely to have 12 years of schooling compared to Jats, and SC/STs even less likelier. Maharashtra, Brahmins are much more likely. Forward castes, OBCs and Marathas, OBCs are slightly less likely than Marathas, and SC/STs are much less likely. Gujarat, Brahmins much more likely. Forward castes and Patels equally likely, and OBCs and SC/STs less likely. So far, the picture that's emerging is that on every indicator the position is a little bit different. But so far, if you just had to say, okay, based on what you've heard so far, are these three groups closer to the top end of the spectrum in their respective states or closer to the bottom end? What would your answer be in the middle of this presentation? Closer to the top. So that's really, yeah. So if you just had to say, okay, where do they fall really? And they're even better off than OBCs on a whole range of indicators. And they're in many places they're closer to the Brahmins or the forward caste. Of course, the picture varies for every state and for every indicator. That's why you need to do this nuanced analysis. Now, here's an interesting picture, which is probability of holding a government job. Okay, you have a question on what I've presented so far?
No, I'm just curious to know if one of the indicators is higher education.
12 years of schooling or more, that's higher?
No,
12 and more.
Yeah, higher education, university or college.
We have that as well, but we just showed the 12 and more. Because if you don't do 12, you can't go to college, right? Yeah, so, but to make the story more interesting, we are showing different kinds of indicators. I mean, we have many on education itself. We have the transition from primary to middle, middle to secondary, secondary to senior secondary to college. So we have all of those. But I'm just showing you a range of indicators to show you that there are many different ways that you can analyze this problem. Now here's an interesting thing, because all of this is being done for government jobs, right? The agitations are really, they don't get classified as OBCs, it's going to be. So let's look at the probability of holding a government job now, right now, without them being classified as OBCs. So Jats, interestingly here, Brahmins and Dalits have a greater probability of holding government jobs than Jats. This is the only indicator in which, other than of course probability of being poor, this is the only positive indicator in which the Dalits do better than the Jats. So their perception that Dalit children are more likely to get government jobs is true. It is true that Dalits are more likely to get government jobs because of reservations. So when they say their leaders leave the government, they say, look at us, those kids are more likely. That's correct. You see that here already. But their probability of getting government jobs is very similar to, already without being classified as OBC, they already have a similar probability of getting government jobs as the current day OBCs. That's the other thing to note from this graph. This is without being classified as OBCs. So without reservation, their probability of getting a government job is same as OBCs in Haryana. In Maharashtra, it's also the same as OBCs. And in fact, in Haryana, in Maharashtra, SC/STs don't even have a higher probability of getting a government job than Marathas. In Gujarat, again, they have a similar probability as OBCs, and again, it's very similar to Haryana, where Brahmins and SC/STs have a higher probability of getting a government job than Patels. So Jats and Patels have many similarities actually in terms of their respective things. Marathas are a bit different in terms of their relative placement. Yes.
Clarification.
Yeah.
What's the meaning of the word probability here? Is it?
So you have these household questionnaires. So they ask every member of the household saying, are you working? So you say yes or no. Then they say, are you working? It's a public sector job or a private sector job. So you have that information for all individuals in a household, and then you run what is called a probit model. I mean, it's basically you calculate a probability. So if there are 100 people and if 10 people have a government job, then for what is the probability of getting? It's 1/10. 1/10.
It's a bit simplistic.
This is a probability. This is absolutely correct.
Anyway,
And this is not just it's not just a ratio. It's a regression. So it's after controlling for all of those things. I don't know if you paid attention to the regression equation that I was showing. So you say, okay, you control for urban, which means so urban people are more likely to get government jobs than rural. So that of course is one of those. So what if you control for urban? So you compare like with like. Okay? You might find that the education of the head of household makes a difference. What if you control for that? What if maybe some districts are closer to the capital, so they are more likely. So what if you control for that? So it's more sophisticated.
And just lastly, do you have any data that you collected on how many jobs are actually holding
This data I did not collect. This is the India Human Development Survey data, which is in the public. Yes. This is for the households they survey. This is a household survey. So in this data, you can tell in this survey how many jobs have government jobs. That's how you calculate
My
that.
question was, if there are 100 government jobs available, in absence of any reservation, how much jobs are actually occupying those offices?
No, so that is hard. No, this is a household survey.
That's what
No. This is a household survey. This is when people go from house to house saying, okay, tell me how many people live in your household, etc. So this is a very standard and tried and tested and completely valid method of estimating the well-being of populations. It's done all over the world. It's done in India.
I'm not disputing that, but
Yeah.
my only question is, and I am from Teacher and I'm from Haryana, born and brought up.
No, that's
So
what the government will release.
No. The point is that if they say, for example, there are 100 jobs in the state government job created of all kinds, class 1, class 2, class 3, and class 4. And if the total number of jobs is 100 and 70% of those are actually jobs, then I mean the case
That
for
would show up
reservation
here.
becomes.
Well, yeah, true. So we are already saying that the case for reservation is weak. So that's what you can see that we are driving. You know, the difference between a household survey and a total census is the following. So, you know, I don't know how many of you like cooking, but you know, I was cooking some pasta last night and I wanted to see if it was cooked or not. So I didn't test every single pasta, right? What I did was I just picked up one and I tested and it looked cooked and I said, well, that's good. That means all the other pastas are cooked. So I took a sample and I tested for that and it gave me an indication of what I can realistically, so maybe it's possible that one of those pieces of pasta did not get cooked. It's highly likely. But based on one sample, I could tell, okay, if this one is cooked and given that they were all put in the water at the same time, there's a very high probability that all of them will get cooked. So if you do your sampling in a reasonable manner, if you follow, you know, there's a sampling theory, if you follow statistically rigorous sampling theory, then conclusions that you can draw from the sample are actually, could be made valid for the population. So these figures are done from the sample. This is not from those who are supplying the jobs, which is the government, right? So this is not, that's another way of doing it and that's a good way of doing it as well, which is you go to a government department and say, okay, how many jobs do you have in these various categories, how many are jobs, how many are Brahmins, how many are all of that. That's one way of doing it. That is from the supply side, or rather from the demand side in terms of the labor market. That's an enterprise worth doing completely, but that's a harder enterprise to do, right? What these surveys such as this one, what they do is they say, okay, we want to get a sense of the well-being of the population in terms of material indicators. So we are looking at poverty, we are looking at government jobs, we are looking at education, we are looking at nutritional status, we are looking at networks, you know, whatever you want to look at basically. So you create a survey and then you sample the population accurately. Now if your sampling is wrong, then of course none of these conclusions can be totally not representative of the underlying sampling. So if your sampling technique is correct, then the conclusions that you draw from here are fairly reasonably accurate for the full picture. So obviously I can't say 100% if this represents accurately the jobs that the government of Haryana has created, I don't know. But we can take it as being fairly accurately represented, right? So that's what this. So this is the methodology that we are following here. We are interviewing households, and based upon the information that the households are giving, we are drawing some conclusions. And so, without being classified as OBCs, their probability of holding government job, which is being calculated not as a ratio but as a in a valid statistically rigorous manner, you find is not very different from OBCs. Okay. So what is the sum conclusion of all of these slides that I showed you? Overall, Jats, Marathas and Patels are closer to Brahmins and forward castes than they are to SC, STs or OBCs overall. Of course, in every indicator, the picture is different. This is already the case without access to quotas. Okay. Why then the massive mobilization for quotas? Why are, so there is clearly a lot of anxiety, and that anxiety is real. It's not made up. What are the factors behind their anxiety? So then we said, okay, let's look at that. So we looked at the press commentaries, we looked at magazine articles, we looked at newspaper articles, and we found many causes that were discussed by commentators. So people said, that these groups were the ones that initially benefited from both the green and the white revolutions, the milk revolution in Gujarat and the green revolution, and they became dominant and successful and rich in their respective states because of those benefits. Importance of agriculture is declining. There are water shortages everywhere, and the farmers are legitimately concerned about how that's going to affect their productivity. There's growth of massive agro-business, including that from multinational corporations. And these individual farmers, however big they might be, they might feel that they're disadvantaged in relation to the agro-business, and they're losing out. And the globalized sectors, like the IT sectors, or where English is needed, all of those sectors, their young folks might be feeling that we are not being able to get jobs there because we were not trained that. So these were the anxieties that we tried to, again, same analysis. So we said, okay, what is the probability of holding a casual job in agriculture? So we find actually that that both the Brahmins, the current day OBCs and SC STs in Haryana have a higher probability of holding a casual job. So casualization is in economics is considered, casual jobs are considered worse than permanent jobs. So you find here that even here they are not in, at least the Jats are not as worse off as they themselves believe.
Is it in agriculture?
Agriculture. I'm coming to non-agriculture.
No, what do you mean by casual in agriculture?
So casual is like a daily wager?
No, not
No, there's no contract which, yeah, that's, so again, I'm going to rush through now, through each it up. Basically the point here is that if you look at probability of holding casual jobs, and they are not very different from forward castes again. So again, very similar picture that you get here compared to the earlier, so casual job is considered more disadvantageous than a contract, longer term contract job, so there's that. Okay, but here look at the picture here. Probability of holding a casual job in non-agriculture. Here, they are more likely to be, so if they moved out of agriculture and they moved into non-agricultural jobs, okay, they are more likely to be employed in casual jobs as opposed to non-casual jobs. So again, the anxiety is real. So look at Jats for example. So Brahmins, forward castes and OBCs are less likely to be employed in casual
What
jobs.
is the job? Does it mean laborer or any other owner?
It could be anything.
It could be an ownership of, say, auto rickshaw.
No, it's a job.
So it's a
It's
labor.
not self-employed. It's labor.
It's labor.
Yeah.
The labor.
It's not self-employed.
Yeah.
Like if you make a tea stall and all, then that's not included.
It's a labor.
It's not. It's non-self-employed people. So these are people who are not self-employed. They are working for someone else, right? And so the Jats, you can see that are more likely, if they moved out of agriculture, if they were to non-agricultural sectors, they are more likely to be employed as casual workers than not. So there is some,
Sorry to interrupt. If you go back to the last slide
yeah.
with the Brahmins, it's very unlikely that Brahmins are agricultural labor or any other. It's most of the time the laborers are Dalits or maybe the
Well, this is
migrant.
what the data are telling. This is what the data are telling us.
No, then we need to be slightly
That's a
doubtful.
perception, sir. That's not fact.
So that's one of the things that we are saying through this
Where
work.
in India Brahmin works in the field?
We can talk about that, but
In Haryana.
if you question this graph, then you have to question everything that I've shown so far, right?
No, just just an point.
No, so
Is surprised by that because you did say
It is
casual
surprising,
job,
indeed.
now casual job is labor.
indeed it's surprising. So, but the point is that if you think that this particular graph is not accurate, then nothing else that I said is accurate. So we can no. Please, sorry. Can I just
Yes.
you know the surprising thing about working with large scale data sets is that I myself, even though I've been working with large scale data sets now for the last 20 years, every time I work on a new paper, I'm surprised by something that shows up because it disturbs my notion of what I thought was the reality. You know?
Sure.
And so I think we should just be prepared to find some surprises. Maybe I can't explain that, and I can't. You're right. But this is what the data are showing. Because for everything that you see in a large data set, you can find not just one, but 20 examples that you know personally that will contradict this, right? But there's the power of the thousands and there's the power of the 20. So I think that's the important part. That's why work with large data sets is important, right? Because you can always find, you know, I don't know whether you read regularly the columns of Chandrabharan Prasad, does anyone read them? Yeah? So he always talks about in his village how a Dalit bought this huge car and he was carrying an iPhone and, you know, people, huh?
Yeah, he does that. He does that on the TV.
Right? So of course that Dalit had an iPhone and of course that other Dalit had a Ferrari or whatever. But the point is, that's not the state of the majority of the Dalits. So you can still have a Dalit owning a Ferrari or an iPhone 7, but you still, this is the, you know, so I think there's something to be said about large data. Anyway, that is a separate question. Let me go through this here, and this is non-agriculture. In IHDS, they also ask questions about fluency in English. Okay, this is all self-reported, but we take it as reported. Here we find actually that in Haryana, Brahmins and forward castes fluency in English is greater than Jats. Jats fluency in English is similar to the OBCs and SCSTs. Again here, the fear that they will lose out on jobs in the new economy that rely on English language skills, that is a real fear. And that's borne out by the fact because education, particularly English language education, was not considered important historically for Jats. In Maharashtra, again the picture a little bit different. Similar actually. Brahmins and forward castes more fluent in Maharashtra than in Gujarat. Actually, you find that in Gujarat it's different in this case. Brahmins, forward castes, and Patels similar fluency in English, better than OBCs and SCs. That's the fluency in English story. So again, to summarize, we have more graphs in the paper, but I just showed you a few. So yes, there is anxiety about vulnerabilities, particularly about non-agricultural, rural livelihood opportunities. We have evidence, for example, from Tamil Nadu, etc., where if you look at non-agricultural rural employment, okay, so one is jobs in the cities, but then there is non-agricultural rural employment. Then first, those are limited. Secondly, the kinds of jobs that are available are very low level, dead end kind of jobs. So the lure of good government jobs is real. So that's what we see. And rural areas in Maharashtra, both in all these three states, Maharashtra, Haryana, and Gujarat, are predominantly agricultural. So avenues of non-agricultural employment are not that big. And combine it with the agricultural crisis story, so you see that there is a certain sense of anxiety. Finally, we have a section on what explains their mobilization success. And so the IHDS data set has data on these kinds of questions that we employed. Probability of knowing party officials from the own community or not from the own community. Probability of knowing elected officials either from the own community or not from the own community. Probability of panchayat member is missing. So probability of a panchayat member either from your own household or from someone who's close to the household. So are you the kind of family who will have a panchayat member, or do you know someone who has a panchayat member? So basically your proximity to elected representative. The three groups are much more likely to know party officials or elected politicians from their own communities. And if you look at the chief ministers of these three states, then the political clout of these communities is clear. Maharashtra, for example, has had only 2 Brahmin chief ministers since 1960s when Maharashtra got created as a separate state. including one is the current one, Devendra Fadnavis. So basically there's been only one Cabinet Chief Minister before that, all others have been Marathas. So it's a very politically very powerful community, and so is the case with Jats and Patels. So all three communities, if you just look at the Chief Minister names of these three states, then you'll see their, so finally, what are my concluding thoughts? Given that the current state of reservations, the current instrument of reservations applicable to the public sector, and the fact that the economy is privatizing means that the scope of reservations is shrinking. So even today, the absolute number of jobs in the public sector are greater than the private sector, but the number of jobs in the public sector has been declining over the last 20 years. Number of jobs in the private sector has been increasing. So the future in terms of job creation is going to be organized sector, I mean, and agriculture anyway is completely private, is the private sector. So the pie is shrinking basically, where quotas can be applicable. Now, a demand for a share of the quota pie by these three groups that are dominant castes, I feel, both of us feel, Rajesh and I feel, threatens to dilute the already shrinking entitlement for Dalits. So the entitlement for Dalits is already shrinking, and then if these communities want a share of the pie, that's going to dilute their entitlement even more. There are structural changes that are objectively increasing vulnerabilities of these groups. So the anxiety is very real, but they have political capital, they have the social capital to mobilize support in their demands, in favor of their demands. So the picture that emerges for us is that caste contradictions are now have taken a new form, that these anxieties have to be addressed. You can't say, well, too bad. You ask for reservations, we are not talking to you. That can't be done anymore. Our recommendation is don't give them reservations, but address the threats to livelihood that these communities are facing. And that is more difficult, that's more complicated, but it cannot be avoided. And that would require many more concomitant changes in policy. But if a problem is difficult, it's difficult. That we have to acknowledge that. And so, objectively speaking, the three castes are not marginalized, while there is, of course, internal differentiation within them. Vulnerabilities are real, anxieties are real, but policy responses should be much more complicated and much more nuanced than just saying, well, okay, you'll get reservations or you'll not get reservations. Giving reservations would be wrong in our view, and not giving reservations and not addressing these difficulties would be even worse. So that's really. That's it. Yeah.
Why can't you draw the inference that somehow the animosity against Dalits is increasing? That is, if you scrap the reservations altogether, these anxieties about not being able to get a non-farm job and so on may not be so pressing. Is it more the prejudice or is it more worry?
It's both true. And I didn't address that part because it was make the story longer. But for example, in Maharashtra, the last from I think July onwards, the Marathas had these Mook Morchas, silent marches, and there are three demands. One was give us reservation, remove the Prevention of Atrocities Act. Prevention of Atrocities Act, you know what it is. So they removed that, and when each time they were called for negotiations. They said, okay, if you can't give us reservations, remove them from the Dalits. So if we can't get it, then they can't get it either. And this is a very important subtext. Not just in Maharashtra. Maharashtra, they are more articulate about it, but everywhere. And even the Jat leaders who have been interviewed, the feeling that, oh, that son of a so-and-so can now get a job in the government job, whereas my son can't. So that feeling that, how can he get it, whereas we can't, So I think the prejudice against Dalits is a very important part of the story. Yeah.
But isn't it part of that majoritarian upswing which we are witnessing throughout India? It's part of that myth. Everywhere you see.
I agree. But except that in some senses, these demands started a little bit before Modi, and in Gujarat actually the problem is a little more complicated because their target is now the BJP. And the Modi. So the story is in terms of politics is a little more complicated. No, but it's definitely a majority thing. And the RSS every now and then throws a balloon in the air to to kind of get people used to this idea. So every now and then, Mohan Bhagwat will say something like, we've had reservations for too long and it's time to end that kind of thing. So yeah, it's absolutely. Yes.
So, some of the graphs that you showed, they can be interpreted in very different ways. The question that came to my mind is that historically the question has never been in Haryana whether Jats, the household expenditure of Jats is at the same level as that of the OBCs. It has always been in relation to the Gujars and the Yadavs. It has never been, the possibility that OBCs could survive as a group, as a cohesive group, 50-60% of India's population, could have some defining characteristic, and then you could show that characteristic and say that Jats are actually of the same level. It's not a satisfactory answer, because what they are saying is, if Gujars can have it and if Yadavs can have it, so can we. That has always been their claim. They are never saying that we are lower than most of the OBCs. They are saying
should at least be the same level, no?
No, they can even be. See, the thing
No.
is, no one is closing
you
the
can't,
door.
you can't change. So you can either say that we are going to follow the existing definitions of backwardness or not.
So that leads to my.
So if you believe that those who are classified as OBCs today were classified looking at certain indicators, then when another group is making that demand, you have to have the scale can't change.
No, scale obviously
Huh.
cannot. But
So-
I'm saying, what is the household expenditure telling us that?
It's
not telling us-
household expenditure, it's the property ownership. This is Gujars and Yadavs are the non-agrarian groups, and most of them are agrarian. That was the division.
No, the larger point I'm making is not about one group. What I'm saying, if you think of OBC as a group itself, which has 60% of India's population, and you're trying to give it a defining characteristic by saying this is the likelihood of OBCs getting a job, this is the likelihood of them owning a land. That itself is very problematic. It's fraught with a lot of differences within the group itself.
Okay,
And there are so many different
can
groups.
I answer that already? So one of the things that I had already said, and I kept repeating that actually throughout my presentation, is that these are averages. Okay, so any average will mask extreme differences, right? Now, as I gave you the example of Chandraman's logs or whatever, you can always point at somebody who's at the top end of the extreme or somebody at the bottom end of the extreme to make the point that you want to make. You can always look at the richer end of the spectrum or the poorer end of the spectrum, and if you, depending on which argument you want to make, you can have examples of either way. The advantage of, so what we are trying to build into this discussion, the way we are intervening in this entire discussion is by saying, okay, let's look at a representative sample from these states and let's try to place these groups, these three jatis, where do they rank in terms of the other major groups. Obviously it's not every jati, they are not being compared to every jati. It's not Jats vis-a-vis Patels or Jats vis-a-vis Gujars or Jats vis-a-vis Yadavs or Jats vis-a-vis Valmikis or Jats vis-a-vis Chavas. You can do that, but it's just going to take too much longer and you're not going to get. So the evidence that comes from large data sets is of this kind, which is where you get the bigger picture.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that if you take that logic, you could also make the case for Jats being even more backward and still meeting the OBC criteria. They could go even more backward tomorrow and they'll still fit the same narrative.
We are not finding that in the data at all.
But that is also comparison
No, but-
of Brahmins and forward castes.
Yeah, we are not finding that in the data. That's what I'm saying.
No, within the OBCs. I'm saying they could go lower in the present status.
But
they could lose more land.
It's not about individuals, right? It's about the average. So is the average of the Jats, how does it compare to the average of the OBCs? How does it compare to the average of the SC/STs? How does it compare to the average of the Brahmins, and how does it compare to the average of the forward
So
castes?
the second question is the definition of OBCs in your view matches the reality of who the backwards are? Or
No. So that's another paper.
Yes. So
But that I can't go to that. So I already said that, by the way, in the beginning, which is that these are groups that have been legally classified as OBCs by the National Commission of Backward Classes, not by me.
yes, so,
Right?
So what do you take as a benchmark? Do you take the definition as the benchmark, or do you
It
take
has to be because the quotas are applicable. It's not a question of whether I think you should get it or not. It's a question of if your caste is in the OBCs or not.
No, I'm saying there are two ways of identifying OBCs. One is look at those who have got the OBC status,
Yes.
and then seeing if there is something emerging between them, or to take the definition itself as a benchmark and say that these are the people who are OBCs.
That's what the NCPC has done.
Yeah, so
That is what the NCPC has done. So
They said
NCPC
jats are
has.
not OBCs.
They have
no, NCBCs actually said something very different. NCBCs, if you look at the State Commission on Backward Classes on the question of Jat reservation, 4 out of those 7 commissions have called them back. I was myself surprised. I thought the Jats are way forward. But
No, let's forget about Jats. You're asking me about who are OBCs in this data set,
no, actually
right?
there are 2 ways of classifying OBC. One is to go by the definition of social and economic
No.
backwardness.
It's not for us or the survey creators of this data set. You know, I don't know if you've ever done a survey, but if you start determining who's OBC and who's not, that's crazy.
No, no,
So what you have to do is you have to ask to every household, you say, what is your name? You say whatever. You say, is your jati classified as OBC? The only answer to that is yes or no.
Yes.
It's not a question of feeling. It's a question of, does your jati figure in the list that is being designated as OBC? If it is a yes, it's a yes.
My
If it's a no,
question
it's
is
a no.
what goes into the designation of a community?
That's a separate paper.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I understand. So I'm saying what constitutes an OBC? The social and
Okay.
economic backwardness in the
What ought to come? I
No,
don't
no,
know
no,
what
no,
ought to come.
No, it's not a no question. It's identified in the constitution. Socially and educationally backward.
It's already
Yes,
there.
now-
She's saying it's already
I am
there.
saying that I have taken the existing classification of groups that are already getting the benefits of reservation. Those have been legally sanctioned. It's not for me to question whether that is, I mean, it is for me to question, but that's another paper. In this paper, the OBC definition is those jatis that are legally classified as OBCs. Correctly or incorrectly, that's a separate story. But these are the exist, and the JATs are not saying change the definition of backwardness. They're saying we are backward by the same criteria.
Is creamy layer part of the legal definition or is it political?
Sorry?
Creamy layer.
Creamy layer is a part of the legal definition. Yeah, there's a very clear, there are 4 criteria that determine whether it's very much legal, because in our university, for example, we cannot admit creamy layer OBCs on quotas. So we have to determine who the creamy layer is, and so there's a very clear legal definition.
So that
this
takes
is-
care of his anxiety a little bit. That was
No, my
all of
anxiety
the.
His question is actually.
No, so can I just say one thing, because I, just to kind of anticipate future questions, and we are not going to settle anything in this little meeting, so I'd urge you to mull over this, and the papers on my website, you can take a look at it. So one of the issues that comes with any analysis with very large numbers, because it's giving you averages. You always think in your mind of people you know, and they don't fit that average, right? And that will always happen. But that is, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that many of us have, particularly those who live in the state. Okay, so one of the way in which we are intervening in this debate is we are saying that a lot of the evidence that people have said either for or against this demand has been anecdotal, and we need to move away from anecdotal to large data sets. That's the argument that we are making. You don't have to be convinced by that, but that's where I'm coming from.
Any idea what policies there might be that will take these anxieties?
Well, it's a mix of policies. There's no such one. One is the agricultural issue. And agriculture is in a state of crisis. So irrigation, for example, irrigation.
Social sector.
That's in the urban areas, but
Public
yeah, there's a lot of. It's a matrix of. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it was amazing to listen to you and your information. Just 2 questions. One, to seek clarification about the other forward cast. What exactly is in reference in this category? And second is more of a comment actually about the higher education. The point that higher education is clubbed as 12th pass and more is actually very misleading, because I'm just curious to know that does this study, and you might not have used it in your study, but there is a tremendous gap between the people who just go to high school and not reach to college in that particular OBC existing communities. I come from rural part of Rajasthan and I grew up in a village with OBC community, so I'm just curious to know that how does that is captured?
12 12 years or more is not a classification used by the data set. It's not called higher education. We are not calling it higher education. The only point about showing that graph was that if you don't even complete 12 years of education, you are not even eligible to go into higher education. In the paper, we have a separate graph for graduates and more. In the paper, there are many more graphs than what I showed you already. already this took me, over an hour to present. So when you present, you always make a selection. We believe this is a good selection to make because if you don't even have 12 years of education, so at no point do we, the researchers or the creators of the data set, classify 12 years as higher education. So that's just, we don't call it higher education, nobody calls it higher education. That's a graph we chose. The data there's a lot of data, we choose. Yeah, we have evidence for graduates. Absolutely.
Other forward paths?
So in most other data sets, you have only the administrative categories, which is SC, ST, OBC, and then everyone else. Now the everyone else category includes obviously the non-SC, ST, OBC. That's what it is. Now IHDS went a little bit a step further and said that even within the upper castes or even within the non-reserved category, they believe, and that's been borne out by their data, that they believe that Brahmins and other non-reserved castes have different outcomes. And this is the first publicly available data set of this size that actually has separate information. So after you say, yes, that's it. NCR and Merit. So after you say, are you SC, ST or OBC, then you say no, neither of them. Then they say, okay, are you Brahmin? So you say yes or no to that, and then so you get classified as a Brahmin. And then if you are a Hindu, if you are not SC, ST, OBC, and you are not a Brahmin, then they are called other form castes. That's the way it's classified. Yes.
If the structural change hypothesis is correct, and I'm assuming that it is, then would a present day sort of another survey or 1 year hence, would it show some changes in terms of ownership or probability of owning land as well as probability of being poor? Because if the economy is correctly structurally changing the way described, and that is what is really fueling this need for reservations, because now we need government jobs, given that the agricultural sector that is not productive in the same way. There are big agri businesses, which possibly also mean that large parts of agricultural land are being sold to large agri businesses, and we don't get the jobs that we are expecting either in the private or the public sector. Then we would have also become poorer, I suppose. So do you think that, do you predict that sort of a change in the graphs would?
So there's one part of the paper which I didn't show at all because already I didn't show lots of things. So basically this information on the Jati level, the Jat, Maratha and Patel, comes in the 2011 data set. But it's a part of a panel, so I told you it's the second wave of a panel. So what we can do is looking at the household identity, we can identify these same families in 2004, even though the 2004 data set did not have the Jat Patel. So then what we have done is, there's a whole section in the paper where we've looked at changes over time between 2004 and so a period of 7 years, which is a good enough period to examine. And actually, again, interestingly, they are closing their gaps vis-a-vis the Brahmins and the forward caste, and so they are not actually being driven downwards, at least in these 7 years.
So which means that they are continuing to be rich in the same way that you expect them to be rich, or the probability of holding land is remaining similar.
So there we are not analyzing relative to themselves. We are just analyzing relative to this 4 group classification. Have they moved closer to the upper end or have they moved closer to the lower end? Turns out they've moved closer to the upper end. Again, on average, every indicator is a little bit different. But yeah, we've done that for the 7 years, and so.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
I think if you look at the land holding, land is increasingly becoming assets. So even if you just go by that, this land as an asset is not coming into the calculation, because you can be a rich in terms of the assets that you hold, but not necessarily in other categories.
Land is just one of the indicators we've looked at. So we've looked at many different ones, because if you look at the criteria that the Mandal Commission used to identify backwardness, land was only one of them. They had 27 criteria. So look at 27 criteria and then decide whether a particular community can be labeled as backward or not. So you can't only look at Karnataka, only land. If you look at any one of them, you can get a different picture, as you yourself saw. In these slides, every indicator is not showing the exact same thing, showing something different. So the question is, what is the sum total of the? So there is a scoring system. I think we haven't done all that. It's not for us to classify the communities as this way or that way. All we are showing is in the relative position in the states, they are not closer to the OBCs, they are closer actually to the Brahmins and other.
I have 2 questions, and this is looking forward. Sure. First is, courts have intervened and they have spoken clearly. For example, Ramson's case where reservation was charged was declared unconstitutional. Sorry, illegal, not unconstitutional. number one, specifically in Haryana, are the Jats aware of this ruling and what's their response to this ruling as far as their political campaign is concerned? Because they have no intention of stopping their agitations. Second is a different question. In the constitution itself, there is a provision for horizontality in reservations. That is to say, it has to be extended to private educational institutions and to private jobs eventually. Now you have put forward the structural change hypothesis. To what extent are these two ideas consistent? Because it has been conceded by the Supreme Court on occasion too that this principle of reservation is not exactly meritorious, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to remedy. So merit doesn't play that kind of a role. But private sector has always been considered to be a place where you get a job based on your merit. Now, if you apply horizontality there, then there seems to be an inconsistency in these ideas. How do you think the Jats are going to respond to this, and then how do you respond to it?
I have written extensively on it. As far as whether the Jats know about it or not, that I would not be able to say. No.
I mean, has there anything anyway?
So you should tell me whether they know about it or not.
Pass an amendment to overrule the court order.
Yeah, as far as I know, their demand is very much on the agenda, and so I suspect that they know it, and they still want resolution. So the idea of reservations in the private sector has not really been accepted in the sense of there's been talk about it, and there's a voluntary code of conduct that the CII, the Confederation of Indian Industries, and the FICCI, Federation of
Chambers of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce and Industry, etc. They have a voluntary code of conduct where they feel that they should pay attention. But I've written about it extensively. Is reservation anti-merit? I don't think so. Is hiring in the private sector done only on merit? I don't think so. But that is another time. I've written a lot about it, so you can check it out.
Yeah, so you talked
So
about
your question is there a higher probability that Jats or the Pateels will get jobs in the merit sector?
No, they might push for
But the
legislation.
student wants to, sir, the student is waiting for a long time.
just wanted to ask, so you talked about closeness to political representatives. So if you talk about these three very states, so Gujarat, Haryana and Maharashtra, so in all of these three states, in Haryana we have non-Jat CM, in Maharashtra we have Brahmin CM, and in Gujarat we have a CM who is a Jain. So in all of these three states, instead of giving into tokenism, instead the government is really getting out and working on the real aspect of employment. So isn't that doing away with political anxiety in that regard?
Increasing the anxiety.
It's increasing the anxiety.
If that was the case,
Because this is only the second non-Maratha CM that Maharashtra has had.
No, but
So why will it make Marathas feel happy that finally we don't have a Maratha CM?
if that was the case in Gujarat, there had been always a Patel
Yes.
representative
Yeah.
close to Patel. So
Yeah.
did that solve the problem of anxiety? That is.
I don't know if did you come in the beginning when I talked about how the Patels were anti-reservation? Did you hear that part? You came later, right? So I did talk about all that. So the Patels have actually changed their tune. But that's in the beginning part of my paper, so read it.
So, but,
Even the Jats.
Even the Jats, yeah.
but within Patel there are two opposite factions who keep on opposing each other. So
There is never an agitation in which all members of a given community support it. There has never been. Even freedom struggle was opposed by many. Many Indians thought they would be better off under the British, right? But it's not a question of, it's not that question. The point is, what does the majority of that group, or what does a large enough segment of that group feel? A large enough segment of the group is out demanding this. So that's why it's a serious demand. That doesn't mean that every single Patel person has to support it, or every single Jat has to support it. That's not the point. The point is a large enough number of Jats and a large enough number of Patels support it for it to become an issue. It is an issue.
So in Haryana, if you talk about Haryana, so the CM was always of the Jat community. So but did that solve political
Not at all.
anxiety?
I never said it would. I'm just saying, I don't know.
What would be the
So did you say that I think?
What would be the
What is
accommodating
the question?
factors? What would be the accommodating factors in your?
No, forward looking again.
Which part of the presentation did you cover? Did you talk about did you see the part where I talked about the vulnerabilities in different spheres and how the challenge of policy formulation is very complex and reservation is really not the answer? That's the answer.
Any questions from
I mean, what I'm saying is a very long answer, and I showed many different slides to show how there is a real problem, and that I agree with you, tokenism is not going to solve it. And similarly, this kind of giving reservations on a token basis is not going to solve it.
Any other questions from the sides? Yes.
My question is that this is not the first time that we are having all these agrarian movements. We had the Bharatiya Kisan movement, which has agitated in western UP. We've had Sangatans in Maharashtra, which have also, they've mostly agitated on basis of policy, like we want this, we want more electricity, we want free electricity, we want dams, we want canals. But this time, why is it that all these communities which are actually agriculturally flourishing, having an anxiety, then going towards reservation, which is actually contradicting their own stance? Is it because they have more belief in the judicially enforced reservation rather than executive policy formulation? Like, is that one of the reasons?
It could be also because government job is a more tangible, it's a clear thing, no? So you see it in front of you, see there, okay, you apply for, whatever, post, PN post or clerk. It's a post, it's there, you go on your address, it seems like it's an easier option rather than saying, okay, change the policy, make irrigation, have a comprehensive policy towards agro-business. That seems like a much tall order. So maybe they think that if they got this, then it's actually more tangible, it's something immediate. You can see them, you can see government servants, you can see government jobs being created. So it seems it might be more tangible. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say exactly why this mode is preferred, but that's what we are trying to analyze in this paper.
Firstly, thank you so much for your presentation. It's given us so much more to think about. So mine is almost, it's an observation. So unlike many of the demands for reservation, which are based in terms of, backwardness, these demands seem to be, yes, there is a backwardness associated with the demand. Yes, there is an anxiety associated with the demand, but I think it's also coming out of a caste entitlement. So it's at one level, it's not trying to portray itself as backward, whereas at the other level, it's trying to ask for reservations or making that claim towards reservations with respect to an entitlement. So a political and economic entitlement that they have had and enjoyed so far with respect to at least the agricultural work that they've done, that is not being translated in terms of jobs and just losing out in the globalized economy. So it's a fairly sort of different way of addressing the question of reservation. It's not really about asserting your backwardness, or probably it's also coupled with the fact that we are demonstrating caste entitlement in nominations.
You can interpret it that way, but it's very clear that they want reservations in the OBC category. So OBC is other backward classes. So it's very clear that otherwise how will you say that you want to be considered? I mean, there's a procedure to be classified as OBC, right? You have to make a claim. That's the way communities get classified as OBC. So in that claim, you have to demonstrate your backwardness. You can't say we are very privileged, therefore we should be given OBC status. You can't say that.
So I was reading Professor.
You may disagree with that, or you may think that although it's from it's entitlement through the back door or something, that these are all interpretations. But the actual thing that's happening is that give us OBC status because we are lagging behind on XYZ indicators. So getting OBC status is not as perceptions can drive it, but you have to eventually, communities have to produce data.
In Haryana, Jats are not demanding OBC status within the state, at least within the state. They've asked for reservations.
They want to be OBCs in the central list so that they can get jobs in Delhi.
Yeah, and another argument that's coming is that some of the castes within the Marathas the attempts were being made to include them within the OBCs, but they rejected that, saying that we do not want to be identified as backwards earlier. And yes, it's coming back to.
So the classification into these categories, to the best of my knowledge, is demand driven, in the sense that the community that wants to be included has to make a case for it. So what happened in 1950 is one thing, So that was when the constitution came into existence, there was a transition. Most of the 1930s list was carried forward, few more jatis were added, so that was one thing. Subsequently, all additions have to be proved, there has to be a claim. So the jati has to, and there are, actually I was surprised when I was writing something else, actually went to the websites of these commissions and I found there are hundreds of claims that little jatis make and they keep getting rejected routinely. I had no idea. I didn't think, I thought, oh, it's only when you come into the streets marching and waving flags, then people sort of reject them. That's not true. The NCBC rejects as many as 600 claims a year. So 600 different communities are going to the NCBC and saying, classify us as OBC, and they look at the set of claims and they say, well, there's not enough evidence and we are not going to accept it. So unless it changes now, I don't know, but so far the only way to get benefits of these reservations is that you have to prove that the criteria that we use to classify existing communities are applicable to us as well.
More questions? We still have a few minutes.
What are the 4 criteria for backward creamy?
No, creamy level. Backwardness, I think there are 27.
What are the 4 for creamy?
One is whether your parents, either one of your parents is a class 1 or class 2 government officer. Do they pay income tax? Then do you have property above, land or property above a certain amount, which ceiling I don't remember, I'll have to Google it. And finally, income level. Income level is the most straightforward, but often individuals are not able to produce an income certificate, so then they use these 3 other criteria to.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
In Balaji versus the state of Mysore, it was held that the caste of a person can't be the sole criterion for asserting a particular caste as backward or not. And I know other determinants like poverty and then occupation, place of habitation all need to be taken into consideration. And it was also said that the government must review this test. And if a family or a group reaches the state of progress where a reservation is not necessary,
It should be removed from the list.
Now, is this a viable way of implementing reservation?
This is the way it has been done so far, and in fact now just last week they declared that the NCBC is now going to be disbanded. It's going to be replaced by National Commission for Socially and Educationally Backward Classes. So it's NC something. I don't know what the full form, the short form of it would be. So it's already going to be changed now. So the criteria, I don't know what criteria they detail, the new commission. We'll see. But caste is never this, at least for backwardness, caste is never, even for scheduled caste. Caste is a major component but not the sole.
Any other questions? We'll back.
I have to go, so
Thank you so much, Professor.